Welcome back, everyone, to SwansCast Podcast. So I'm joined today by a very special guest in this mid sort of like off-season period between obviously last season and the new season to talk about Swansea's history. So welcome, Stuart Quigley. I'm hoping I said that right.
Yes.
Okay.
I've been called a lot worse, definitely.
That's fine. I meant to check with you before we started, but I just realized when I rolled the intro, I was like, oh, I didn't check the surname. But yeah, okay, I'm glad I got that right. But yeah, welcome on board. So a little bit of background. So Stuart, you reached out to me just to sort of like ask who you can pop on to have a chat about the Swans. I was more than happy to do so. Some good kind of content in what is sometimes a bit of a dull period, especially dull for us down here at the moment because there's nothing going on in the transfer window, which is like the only thing that ever happens at this time of year. So, well, I say dull. I mean, Wales just qualified for the World Cup, so I guess we got that to sort of be happy about.
You say that though, it's one of these things because the World Cup's like later on in the year. I feel like we're being sort of tantalisingly close to something brilliant, and then we have to wait a couple of months for it. It's going to be great when it happens.
Yeah,
it could have been now, so we could.
It's also frustrating that it's like the one time Wales qualify, it's in November. To be honest, like I would have loved to have been in a. It's obviously a proper World Cup, but you know what I mean, like a traditional summer big event, going out in a beer garden watching the football. But now we're going to be watching it without coats on, I guess. But it would be good nonetheless to be there. But yeah, so you reached out to me to sort of ask if we could have a chat to go alongside some of the stuff that you might be writing in your new book. So I think the first thing to do is, do you want to introduce your book, what you're doing, what the aim is of it, and maybe where people can find it and that sort of thing?
Sure. The book is called The Cornerstone Collection, and it is as comprehensive a tome as you can ever imagine in terms of Premier League history over the last 30 years, because it covers not just every club, but every era and every position that the players could have played. Because when it came down to this, I wanted to write something that was, Premier League history, 30 years now, it's sort of well-timed in that regard, but also talk about not just the things that everyone have heard. There are some really like famous players in there. I'm not going to turn around and say like, oh, we're talking about complete unknowns, and especially like talking about club-specific players. Every club has their own history and sort of the players that the fans gravitate towards. So you can talk about your Rooneys and your Thierry Henrys and Steven Gerrard's all you want, but I wanted to delve a little bit deeper there and get into some more sort of the stories that are there to be told that haven't yet been told necessarily.
Yeah, it's always good sometimes to like look from maybe the perspective of the fan of the club rather than who's making the headlines potentially, because I think sometimes the one player that's making all the headlines, doing all the like the big stuff in terms of scoring goals and the big influences, isn't necessarily the fans player of the year or something like that, for example. I know that happens quite often down here, but it's nice to sort of learn a little bit more about those hidden gems, I guess. But yeah, go on. Go on. You go on. I was going to move on, but
yeah, no, I just gonna say everyone knows like the history of like, oh, who's the best players in the Premier League, but they've become very monotonous in terms of the teams, and you get an idea of like, okay, it's a Liverpool thing, it's a Man United thing, it's a Man City thing, it's a Chelsea thing, it's an Arsenal thing. But I wanted to dig deeper into every club that's ever played in the Premier League, and some of them are more, what shall I say, generous than others. There are a couple of chapters where it just touches on a team as opposed to goes deep. But for Swansea very specifically, there's a good period of time there and a good story to tell over the course of not just how Swansea came into the Premier League, but what they did while they were there as well.
Yeah, the Swansea story and the rise up is obviously a massive part of our history down here, and we're still in the honeymoon period of letting that go, if you like. So you know, it was a good rise up to the top, and then it ended, and we're still trying to get over that. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Some people, I don't know if you know much about this season. I'm sure we'll talk about it perhaps towards the end of the podcast, but we're in a transition to try and play a more attractive football again, which is probably the sort of stuff you're talking about if you're talking about the rise up. But I think it's a big question at the moment because last season, or the season before, sorry, where we had Steve Cooper and we were in the playoffs. He's just got promoted to the Premier League with a different club now, playing a completely different style of football. The question down here was, do we want that style of football, or do we want to go back to the Swansea way? But is it right these days that that's the way to go forward? And I think that's what we're kind of debating down here right now, or
well, I think
maybe struggling with, I guess. But yeah.
From an outside perspective, one of the things that I found fascinating about the Swansea story, and if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me here, but I feel like the way that you came up through the leagues, and specifically when you first began in the Premier League, you were how every other club should be run. And you put a lot of other teams to shame with the resources and what you managed to do with those resources. And also, for a lot of it, and this is what I try and do in the book, in the sense that, like, there's a single chapter in regard to Swansea City, but I also think that certain other chapters do reflect on other clubs. And also, there's bits to be taken from Swansea that will pertain to other teams as well. So you get a bit of both. And what I say is that in football, you can make good decisions again and again and again and again. And from my perspective, I felt like Swansea made really, really smart choices on and off the pitch for so many years. Yeah. And it only takes one or two for that to fall apart.
Yeah, we got to the heights of the Premier League, and I think in that the desperation to stay becomes a reality.
And that applies to a lot of clubs.
The longer you're there, the more it costs, I guess. The more desperate you are then, because you're spending more to stay there. You have to stay there. And the more that cycle goes on, the harder it is when you finally fall. And that's definitely the story of our last few years. Other clubs, I guess, have gone down worse in terms of maybe trying to spend to get back up straight away and not working out. We went down, cut the costs, took the rough ride, and managed to be remotely successful in the Championship, but obviously we're kind of lingering in no man's land at the moment, so it's still in the rebuilding phase. But we'll get to all that perhaps maybe at the end. One quick question about your book. I know you said you're covering every single club that's ever been in the Premier League. I guess since it was branded as the Premier League, you're talking about, yeah? So how many clubs is that altogether?
So you put me on the spot here, because it's like, who wants to be a millionaire? It's either 49 or 50. I'm going to say 50. It would have been 51, and I would have been screwed if Luton would have come up this season. So thankfully, the book is completely safe. But yeah, 50 teams that have been there over the course of the last 40 years, last 30 years. There's so much in terms of what's happened over those years. And again, Swansea very much, when they arrived in the Premier League, part of a sort of shake-up and a one of the things I would say about the Premier League is it gets this reputation. It's it's the be-all and end-all and all this and all that. And I think, money-wise, fine, but it needs freshening from time to time. And Swansea very much were that at the time. And like I said to you before, and this isn't just me sort of trying to get over with the fans of Swansea, but at the time you arrived in the Premier League, it was the perfect storm of a collection of players and a system, a setup, not just one manager, but two managers that managed to defy the odds, and not just defy the odds we'll just survive relegation. You thrived for those first couple of years. And that's, and I think as well, like what I'm going to, in terms of relation to the Swansea City chapter, I'm not going to necessarily give away the player that we're going to be talking about just yet. But I think there's a very direct parallel between the success of, I'm going to give a slight spoiler, right? A forward, in terms of you got to pick your right moment. You got to choose no one knows what goal is going to be the goal that changes everything. So whenever a striker puts the ball in the back of the net, it could be inconsequential. It could be like a late consolation goal, but it could be the goal that everyone remembers forever. And with clubs as well, that direct comparison between making sure you do the right things at the right time. And like I say, Swansea, they did it very well for a very long period of time. And I thought when it came to picking the player for Swansea, the parallel between the rise and then the subsequent, what happens after he leaves the club, was very apt.
Yeah. And it's definitely a tale of two halves.
Yes.
Yes. But Okay, so let's go to the beginning. You said about, for example, goals that live long in the memory because of the influence they've had, perhaps. But maybe when we got to the Premier League in the playoff semi-final, I would say there's one iconic goal from Darren Prattley where he scores from like halfway line. I don't know if you've seen that one, but it was against Nottingham Forest. It was at home. We actually drew the first game 0-0 up there, playing 10 men for like 70 or 80 minutes or something like that. Really, really early on, the red card was. So I think it was like their keeper was in the box at the end. We went in 2-1 and the ball breaks and he scores from the halfway line. And the scenes of joy basically from Brendan Rodgers running down the touchline. That's the sort of stuff of dreams, because for us it was a big thing getting to the playoff final, and then obviously we went up afterwards. Brendan Rodgers sticking with us then in the first season. And you are right in what you're saying. We went up and we were determined to stick to our guns. We play this way now under Brendan Rodgers and obviously Martinez before him, even though there was Paulo Sousa in between. That changed things a bit for 1 year, but it didn't knock too much out of the system. But yeah, so we went up determined to stick the way that we wanted to play. First couple of games were rough, or first month or two was quite rough, I think. But it wasn't rough in a way that we were just getting battered and pushed to the side. You could see we were doing what we wanted to do. It was just like that quality of finishing from the Premier League teams was obviously undoing us. But I think ultimately, by Christmas even, we looked quite stable. It was quite a good time to be a Swansea fan. It was kind of like proving all the doubters wrong. Everyone had us favourites for relegation to finish like last in the league, obviously coming up as the playoff winner as well. And I don't think we really spent big money on players when we came up, especially compared to today's standards. I think Danny Graham was our record signing at the time for £3.5 million. So it seems like an eternity ago. It's only 11 years now, isn't it? So yeah, so I don't know what your sort of recollection of that time is, but
I remember obviously Swansea, certain teams, not just Swansea, come up with a vibe, a reputation of, oh, these are a bit different. And I do think that this has changed slightly over the last 20 years, maybe not 30 years, in terms of teams coming up from the Championship, where at once it was, we're just going to go up for a season and we'll take our beatings, we'll take our medicine, and it's fine just to have been there and experienced it. We get our away days and that's it. And there was a shift. And I said to you before, like, the Premier League, it might not be the be all and end all, but other than the prestige of like the money, the overhypedness of Sky, but Swansea came up with a plan. Swansea came up with a style, and it wasn't just a style, as you said, that goes back like 1 year or so. It was something that had come up through Martinez and League One, and obviously you had certain players that had been around that time as well. It wasn't like the squad had been chopped and changed, or you got like brand new owners that had come in and you moved to a different setup completely. It was a settled side. It was a side that had a certain level of fearlessness, I think is the right way of putting it. And when teams come up, not just Brendan Rodgers, because Brendan Rodgers obviously has gone on to different things in the Premier League, but when teams come up and they want to play football, there's a little bit of arrogance there of going, yeah, it's fine if you want to play football, but you're not going to get away with it though, are you? You're going to get squashed, or teams are going to do this and do that. And Swansea never were.
No, there's actually some stats from that first season. I wish I grabbed them before the podcast, but there's some ridiculous stats about our passing percentages and possession and stuff like that in the top 5 European leagues. And we're up there with like Barcelona, Man City, like in the top 3 or 4. And obviously for the team that's finishing, what was it, 10th or let's have a check, 11th, sorry, in the first season in the Premier League, to have stats up there. We had players on the creating chances list. I think Mark Gower, who wasn't necessarily one of our star players, but he was popping up on like assists or chance creations, and Leon Britton, I think, was the stalwart there on the pass success for an individual player right at the top. But mixing with the likes of Xavi and Iniesta in terms of his pass success rates, and that makes you quite proud as a fan of the club, especially when you're a team that's come up in that year. Like we weren't necessarily winning as many games as the big teams, because you're not going to, realistically, you're never going to go from Championship to the top of the Prem straight away like that. But we were happy to be where we were. Like we were happy with 17th that season. So to be 11th was, well, it was amazing. Very good first season. Anything else you wanna go through with the start?
I'll transition that over, because the thing about the Premier League is that, and this is something that becomes more of a theme as Swansea's time continues, is that it's the ruthlessness of it in terms of Swansea come up, they do very well, they defy expectations, but maybe not in a way that yourselves would have expected it, but just in a, oh, this is working. You know, it's a complete defiance of common sense in a way. Like, you can come up, you can play, you can do this, whatever. First things first, we'll take whatever players you've got. So this works in tandem with, fine, Rodgers, he does so well. And I do think you are slightly unfortunate in the sense that the bigger teams that year, there was a really weird parallel between Liverpool, Norwich, Swansea, and Aston Villa at the end of that season, where Swansea beat Liverpool on the final day, Norwich beat Villa on the final day, and both clubs end up taking those managers. They go in very different paths, but it's one of those ones where, okay, you've had your fun, you've come up, you've done this. Rodgers goes to Liverpool, Joe Allen follows him. Now, okay, you're going to find the real truth. This is the Premier League as it's cutthroat, worst, best. That's what happens now, is the real sort of harshness. And even though Swansea had it wasn't like a 1-year success thing. It was like a 5-6 year plan. And so when you have that kind of stability at a sort of top level, the decision then, okay, Brian Laudrup comes in, certain players get chopped and changed. And that's where we see something that I think every club has, but you're lucky enough as a fan to experience those feelings, those players, those moments. And I said before that I wasn't going to spoil who the player we're talking about in the book for Swansea. But when it comes to the players that were prolific during that time, there are a couple I could have had, and there's a couple of obvious ones. And one of those is Mitchell, and it's not Mitchell, because that is, and I think there are certain parallels here as well in terms of, like, everyone loves when players come through the ranks. Everyone loves when they come through the academy or they go into the team, or if they're just there for a long period of time, like Liam Britton. But there is something special about someone coming from out of nowhere, someone coming from abroad, someone who younger fans, who even older fans would have got, I can't believe this fella's come from, in Mitchell's case, somewhere in Spain, and now he's ours.
Rio Valenciano,
and now he's doing, and he's doing this. And that's the power of football. You can bring these players from all across the world, and everyone. And I will openly admit that I am a bit of a footballing romantic, because there's a lot of talk about mercenaries, about, oh, you bring these players in, what do they care, what do they do? But I do believe in the power of connections in football. I think that's what the book is about, sort of players' connections with fans and so on and so forth. And Amichu is a perfect example of that, of someone coming in, and I can say, as someone that wasn't a Swansea fan, everyone was jealous of that.
Yeah, everyone loved Michu, didn't he? I think there was even a quote from Alex Ferguson saying he was going to question what happened with his scouting team to miss such a bargain, because 2.3 million he cost us. And he hit the ground running on his debut, 2 goals against QPR in a 5-0 win, I think. First game under Michael Laudrup. Just set sail on what was going to be, again, another fantastic season. And any sort of question marks over the appointment of Laudrup, because he hadn't had like a massive managerial career beforehand. People didn't know if he was going to necessarily be able to do it, because, you know, you're a good player, doesn't always translate into being such a good manager. And then he was just fantastic for us that year. So, and yeah, for you to say as well. I mean, he won our first piece of silverware in a long time, like proper silverware now, like a cup, the League Cup. So anytime we've ever won that, took us into Europe. So fantastic season.
Well, that's part of the journey, isn't it? In terms of, like, Swansea, sometimes when you read a book, and I don't do cliffhangers in this book because they're all concise chapters of different players, but sometimes when you read a book, you get a cliffhanger, and the transition from Rodgers to Laudrup could have easily been is it all about to go massively wrong? And it goes one step further, which is the success and the run through the League Cup and the final. The one thing I would like to ask, and this is a question sort of posed in the book, which is, in terms of the final, was the final more Chelsea than it was Bradford?
I went to both. Well, I went to the home game against Chelsea, and I went to the playoff final. But I think the match against Chelsea was ultimately won at Stamford Bridge because we won there 2-0. Danny Graham, I think, scored. I think I mean, it's a long time ago now, but I think he scored at least one of them. And then at home it was kind of like keep them out at all costs. I mean, you got that infamous what's the word? Incident, yeah, sorry, with the ball boy and Eden Hazard, which, I mean, shout out to him now because he owns a big vodka company, unbelievably, which it's a very popular brand of vodka, so he's done well for himself. But yeah, so like excitement, drama, it was a very good experience to be there. But as much as that was like maybe a harder game or a harder set of games, and also Liverpool prior to that as well, I went up to Anfield.
I was there.
That was fantastic away day.
You were unbelievable that day.
Yeah, I mean, Brendan Rodgers as well, being the manager, it was even more bittersweet because, I mean, no one really owes a grudge now, but like at the time, it's like, does he have to go?
I can't remember exactly if it was just before halftime or just after halftime, but the way he fetched Steven Gerrard off the bench was a very sort of telling call.
Yeah, he really didn't want to lose that game, but we loved it. We loved every moment of it. But yeah, like it's a day out to Wembley at the end of the day, so it doesn't matter who you play in. We obviously went to Wembley 2 years prior because of the playoff final, but this wasn't for a promotion. This was for like something else. And, you know, we've only won it once, so it was special in that way. And it got us a ticket across the continent, didn't it? So I think that was a massive party as well. And credit to Bradford as well for getting there.
Yes.
But I don't want to say that right now because you didn't feel it at the time. But I think secretly every Swansea fan must have felt so much more comfortable with that opposition than if Bradford had been knocked out by, was it Aston Villa?
Yes, yeah. I think there was an element of when the semi-final draw was made, everyone had penciled in Chelsea versus Villa in the final, and Villa had an absolute mare against Bradford. And then, like, as I've said, and I think this is just common sense, in a cup final, it doesn't matter how you do it. It doesn't matter who you do it against. What matters is that your team is there holding the trophy aloft at the end of the game.
Yeah. And again, Michael Laudrup, I don't think he's done necessarily massive things after he left us either.
No.
But he's a successful manager as well as being a successful player. So even if he never does management again, you know, to come in, implement the style of play, which I would add on to what you said earlier, was perhaps a step up in flair and attack than what Rodgers was offering. And yeah, he won silverware and took us to Europe. And I know afterwards maybe it was a little bit downhill towards the end of his reign for whatever reasons, but the period of success where it was all working, where his kind of unknown signings came in and were doing well, you know, maybe some of the not so unknown ones. You got Pablo Hernandez, for example. He'd been to the World Cup with Spain. So signing someone like that for Swansea, you got the extreme of Michu, who's kind of like an unknown. No one really knows about him, even though he was playing in Spanish top flight. He still went under the radar, and it was a massive bargain. But then Pablo Hernandez, 4 caps for Spain, played at the World Cup. It was like, oh my God, we can sign players like this now. And obviously he's gone on to have, you know, played well for Leeds in the last couple of years. But yeah, it was kind of a big Spanish contingent that came with Michael Laudrup, and that flair was brought with it. That kind of like, if you want to say tiki-taka, was perhaps the peak of when we were doing that sort of stuff. There was one game, I don't know if you have seen it. It was against West Brom at home in that season. We won 3-1. Romelu Lukaku scored for West Brom in that game. For the first half performance for the Swans in that game, we went 3-0 up. That's the best I've ever seen us play. And I've never seen us play that well since. They were creating so many chances. The attack was so interlinked. I think it was one of the first times he played Wayne Routledge and Nathan Dyer and Pablo Hernandez, with I think Amichu ahead of them. But those three, they didn't really have positions. They were just interchanging between each other. And West Brom did not know how to deal with that at all. And it was amazing to watch.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I talked about, or I referenced rather before, in terms of Swansea, not just before they came into the Premier League, before they were even really in the Championship. I don't think anyone can sit down as a League One team and go, we're going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to work this well. Swansea are just the best example of that.
Yeah.
But in terms of trying to play the right way, and I think the right way always gets overemphasized in terms of it's free-flowing attacking football. At the end of the day, it's about winning, but winning and playing like that with the freedom and the passing sort of technical ability of leaving teams behind. And I think a lot has changed in the Premier League, not just over the last 30 years, but over the last 10. And Swansea, between Rodgers and Laudrup, very much got a jump on everyone in terms of the way they approached their entire setup. And then what ends up happening, is what always ends up happening, is that certain other teams that have bigger resources end up catching up, or just going, you're doing well, we'll have you.
Yeah, know all about that. Know all about that. I mean, I think historically any club from top six, perhaps, or like down from that, is going to suffer that sort of fate. Maybe there's a couple of clubs in the Premier League that can get away with it now, like Newcastle got a bit of money these days. You've got Everton up there. I know, well, nearly not up there, but they've got money, is what I'm saying, and they can perhaps afford to keep hold of their players more than they would have been able to 10 years ago. But anyone coming up, I think right now, coming up from the Championship, it's a lot harder perhaps to stay there and to keep hold of your assets as well. Right now, maybe COVID's had an impact there in terms of how desperate clubs are to get some funds, but it seems a bit different.
This is I don't know what you call it. It's the gamble, ultimately, is when teams come up from the Championship. There are sides that come up and they've played a certain way in the Championship and they have to maybe expand a little. Really random shout, Karanka's Middlesbrough were a side that came up. I thought they were going to be a very different side than what they were, but they couldn't do it, and they ended up being defensively. For half a season, they couldn't score, and then the other half of the season, they kept conceding, so it was just bad on both ends. I always think, from a baseline perspective, if you can't score, if you can't show any signs of attack, and this whole thing of like, don't fear the Premier League, play these guys like they're nobodies and attack them, have a go, and that's the beautiful thing about Swansea in this period, was that like they got their respect immediately. They not only just by the fact of the way they played and how they finished, but everyone knew around the league this was a side that had a plan, and this was a side that had everything sorted. And that sort of links me nicely into, and I'm going to give it away now to in terms of what we're talking about. Swans in the book, the player that of the 45 that have been chosen that are in this book for Swansea is, and this is a chapter on Wilfred Boner, and he comes in to the club a beautiful period. Obviously, you've won the League Cup, you've settled yourself in the Premier League, everything is rosy, and I do think as well that like. It sounds almost stupid now to look back, and hindsight is always perfect for this kind of thing. But he scored 31 goals for Vitesse the season previously. But transfers like that from the Dutch top flight don't always necessarily work into the Premier League. But you'd done so much work in terms of everything you'd done had been a hit, that he was primed and ready to go when you signed him.
Yeah, he was, again, he come in and hit the ground running for us. So talking about transfer fees as well, like I said, the increase as you stay in the Premier League, what I mentioned earlier. I mentioned Danny Graham was like 3.5. Pablo Hernandez was then 6.3. Boney was a massive jump each time, new record. 14.4, or it was like 12 with add-ons, I think.
Yeah.
But coming in, but yeah, I mean, he was worth every penny of it, and paid that back immediately when he started scoring and ultimately got his transfer. A couple of things like with him, I think he added a different dimension to the way we could play because of the style of player he is, but he also allowed everyone around him to thrive as well. And I think, like, obviously you've given me a sneak preview of some of what you've mentioned about him, but one highlight, which I don't think we can not mention, is in the Europa League when we went away to Valencia and got that fantastic result, which is probably I wasn't lucky enough to go to that one, but I think for people that did, is probably one of the highlights ever, being a fan of the club, and he scored in that game as well. So yeah, very good performance and very good time at the club.
Well, I think as well, like looking into Swansea history, like he comes in and the Europa League sort of pre-qualifiers, as it were, and scoring goals in that. And also as well, like when you paid the money that you said you've paid, it's not like you need an instant return, but like you need a return.
Yeah, well, there was actually articles at the time, I think, because we didn't spend that sort of money. It was like, oh my God, Hugh Jenkins, the chairman at the time, he's opened his wallet, like he's opened his purse strings. What if it doesn't work? Like, we're not used to this. And there was articles about that, like, this is a big risk by Swansea. They're in Europa League now, so they can attract perhaps some of these players, and they've gone big on a striker. Like, they've gone big. Is it going to work? And that was kind of the story, but ultimately, luckily for us, and another one where it did just work for us. So,
and I think one of the things that I'm trying to sort of highlight in the book as well is not just the League Cup win is as such a significant piece of any club's history in terms of tangible winning a trophy, but what that unlocks and the memories of anyone. You said like you weren't fortunate enough to go, but the game against Valencia and who Valencia were, by the way, which, having looked at their history, I was actually quite surprised to see that there's not the dip that you expect there. Like certain Spanish clubs have come and gone. Obviously, you've got the top two, but at the time, Valencia were unbelievably respectable, and to go there and to beat them in the way that you did, it's the kind I said to you before. It's the kind of thing that, like, when it comes to players and certain teams and certain eras, every club gets their moment in the sun. I genuinely believe that. I'm fortunate enough to have seen more than enough for mine, and I don't think you get one either. I think it comes and goes in different generations. But looking on, and I remember watching that game where you just destroyed them.
yeah,
And it was, this is as good as it gets. This is the pinnacle. This is incredible. And for a team that had been through the division. Sorry, for a team that was Swansea going through the division. So I was so rapid, fast. But like you
timing on that.
Yeah, but these are the ways and the it's fairy tale stuff to a degree. And unfortunately, the way football works, you have all the fairy tales. It's not quite like that on the back end. But what I always say is, before I preface this, is that you've got the group stage, but also the way that Swansea carried on and went out eventually. In the end, it wasn't like we had that one game against Valencia and that was it. There was a sort of an opportunity there to, and also as well, like credibility is fleeting in football. You have to repeat it again and again and again. It's something that I said before. You can spend 10 years building it and it goes away within 6 months. The best example of this is Alex Ferguson at Man United, everything that happened there. And then what happened with David Moyes. I'm not having a go at David Moyes. That's not his fault. But you spend so much trying to do so much, and how small a time it takes for everything to go away. So when you're in those good moments, you have to really take them. You have to really hold them and acknowledge them.
Yeah, definitely. And you said about the Valencia game, but like we went on obviously to play Napoli in the later stages, not under Michael Laudrup by this time though. Gary Monk had taken charge by this moment, but we should have won that tie. I went to the home game. I don't know how that was 0-0. Honestly, again, saying one of the best I've seen us play without scoring. We had so many opportunities, but just couldn't. The keeper was making saves. They were making good blocks. We made that Napoli look not like a top European team in the home game, and even away from home. Ultimately, they got the result, but it wasn't like we didn't really give them a good game. and we did get quite unlucky. And I remember I was absolutely fuming. I think it was right at the end, we were pushing on. I think we had a counter attack on the break, ball over the top, and I think Jonathan de Guzman broke the offside trap. It was literally 1v1 with the keeper. But just before the ball's coming down and lands, the referee blows his whistle. But like he's literally gone past all the defenders. They're all like, they've gone. And I think they were all going nuts. All the players were like, what are you doing? Like, you can't blow up there. But yeah, what could have been, but still it was a good journey nonetheless. And I mean, who knows when we'll ever get back into Europe? It's not like the old days where you could win the Welsh Cup and have a little bit of a journey. But that's why this one specifically, I think, was so special in our history and so important as well. Who knows when the next one will be? But got that to remember otherwise.
Well, yeah, I think Europe and European football it holds a special place in not just club competition, but just fans' hearts. There's something different about a Thursday night in maybe August in the group stages where you're dreaming of what could be, or just simply going to somewhere different that you've not seen. The whole idea of an adventure, that's what they call it. And that's what I think is fantastic about European football. And obviously, you go back in Swansea history, you said winning the Welsh Cup, and they had been in Europe before they had experience there. But I think I have this right. I'm trying to recall this off the back of my head. I think Wilfred Boney is Swansea's all-time top scorer in Europe.
Probably in Europe, I think. I don't know off the top of my head either. I mean,
there's one or two lads that scored in the 14-0 victory way back when that may have better, but
I'm not sure how many people have that sort of record readily available, perhaps. But I'm not sure off the top of my head.
It's close either way, and that's like if you can see that, if you can bear witness when you're a part of that generation, then it's like, and also as well, like it's the romance of it. It's not a club that sort of got to where they were because they got taken over by a sheikh or... Do you know what? I'm going to hold my hands up here. I don't dispute any of this because fans' experience is our fans' experience. And one of the things that I like to try and put over in the book is that every fan base exists within its own bubble. You have your own experience, and your own experience is the best it can ever be, because you're never going to look at another team and go, I want what they've got. No, because you have what you have, and what you have is fine. What you have is great, because you can go to the matches, you can go home and away, you can experience the trials, the tribulations, the ups, the downs, the highs, the lows, because it's not who we support that brings us together. It's the fact of the game itself and the pull that it has over us and what that can do. And the you said about the playoff semi-final and the highs and that, and obviously the League Cup. But man, I've had different experiences, but I've had just as many highs.
I mean, it's different, isn't it? Every club is different. Like for us, there's different expectations, and getting to that sort of a journey like in the Europa League, that's a massive high for us. Whereas maybe if you're Man City right now, that's not a high for you because you're expecting more. So it's just the different expectations are going to give you different emotions depending on your situation and who you support. And I guess that goes all the way down a football league. Like I can't remember the team who it was this season in the FA Cup that got quite far from non-league. But that's probably quite similar for them in terms of I think they're making history of how far they went and who they're playing against as a non-league team. And going so far in the cup. I can't remember who it was now, but they were playing.
I remember Kiddie played West Ham, but I think that was.
Or maybe it was last season, but
I know the team. What about some of the team? Oh, Sutton United,
yeah. All those sort of little ones, but there's been one or two in the last couple of seasons, but there was definitely a non-league one, and I think they have to walk through people's gardens to get to the to get to the stadium, or you could literally see on the TV. There was people in their gardens watching the match because that's how small a stadium is, because that's the club. So that's a magical journey getting drawn against a Premier League team. Was it Tottenham? Tottenham had someone. I think it was Tottenham.
Yeah, like I say, it's literally on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. Like I say, I think you use Man City as an example. They experienced unbelievable success over the last few years.
Yeah.
But the fans themselves might not have had quite the same high as any other fan base. It's all relative. A high of the adventure that Swansea went on, I would I'm not going to say it is or it isn't, but the people that were there that witnessed it, are they going to change that for a Man City title win? No,
I think a good
this is what
example
it
is
is.
Leicester as well, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
Man City winning the title this year now compared to when Leicester won it. I think if you're a Leicester fan, you enjoy that so much more than a Man City fan who's won it like 4 times in the last 6 years or whatever it is. You still enjoy it, obviously, but it's not the same adrenaline rush of like, oh my God, that's an unbelievable achievement, because they're expected to kind of do that now. So yeah, you still celebrate the success, but it's also expected success rather than unexpected success, I guess. And that's what the big key difference is there.
And also as well, this links us on quite nicely in terms of the fact that I'm not going to dwell on this too much because we're trying to talk about positives, but in terms of Wilfred Boney at Swansea, everything he did, that run in Europe, how good he was in the league. And then I mentioned this earlier, teams like Man City, the top 6, elsewhere, Bayern, Real, Barcelona, if a team that they perceive to be lower than them is doing well, they ignore them for the most part of the time. But when they don't ignore them is when someone's doing spectacularly well. Yeah, they see a ceiling there that like, oh, we can have you. And the thing about Wilfred Boney going to Man City is, I think certain players fit better in certain sides, and he fit Swansea.
Yeah,
he didn't fit Man City. They didn't buy him because they had a plan for how they were going to play him. They bought him because he scored a lot of goals, and
he's high on that list. In 2014, I think it was the calendar year, he actually was the top goal scorer in the league for the calendar year. I think it was 20 goals or something like that for that year. And obviously then he went in January afterwards. So I think he got a bit unlucky myself at Man City though, because I think he went to the Africa Cup of Nations as they bought him, come back, and it was obviously difficult to get into the team for the last 2 months or so.
Yeah.
And then I believe he had malaria in the summer. And he just was on the back foot really for quite a lot of his career there. I mean, I don't think he was necessarily as much of a flop as some people would say. I think he did score some goals, but he was definitely not necessarily like a £30 million striker who they thought they were going to buy in terms of how much output they would get. But he did a decent squad job for them, I think.
Well, it was one of these things where if he'd been bought with a specific purpose or the manager at the time, and I know it's a slight difference because obviously you've got the eras of Pep Guardiola coming in after Boney, and when he comes in, a lot of things change at Man City. But in the sort of prior setup, it was, we don't really look at this as a case of like, we're buying you for a purpose. We're buying you because we can. And maybe that's being a bit disparaging. Maybe that's being a bit over the top and a bit harsh. But there wasn't a club in the league that wouldn't have looked at Wilfred Boney and gone, could do with a bit of that. And yet, what you do when you buy him for that reason is you fail to understand why he was a success in the first place.
Because the team was kind of built around getting him the ball in the right areas, whereas in Man City, he's just going to go into the team of whoever is on the pitch. It's not necessarily like, it's not designed for him. And he was never, ever, ever going to upset Aguero. Like, that was never going to happen. I think at the time they signed him, they played 2 strikers, so they were rotating. I think it was Aguero, Dzeko, Balotelli was there maybe just before, and Jovetic, was it?
Sounds about right. I think, and I could be wrong on this, Wilfred Boney, one way round or the other, usurped Jovetic's Champions League place in terms of their
I think that's what I saw somewhere, but like I think the manager changed, or at some point the change formation or manager changed or something, and then they went to a 1 striker setup, and all of a sudden you got like all these strikers, but you can only play 1 at a time. So big club problems, I guess. Lots of money, big club, that sort of thing happens too regular. I mean, we had a player from before, Scott Sinclair. He did worse than Boney when he went to Man City. I think he only played like 4 times, but that was a different reason they signed him. That was more earlier in the money days, and I think they signed him just to fill their English player quota, along with Jack Rodwell. But for us, like, we suffer for the sake of them ticking a box. which is what, again, to your point, it's just because they can.
And this is the thing of, it's not the fact that Boney goes to City as to what happens with Swansea in the Premier League. That's not what decides the fate, and it's not even necessarily what happens with Laudrup and him leaving that decides the fate. I don't think it's any one thing. It's the fact of how, as I said to you before, harsh, cutthroat, ruthless, whichever way you want to call it, Swansea had done so many good things, and they made maybe one or two bad decisions. I'm thinking of Bob Bradler.
Yeah.
And then it all goes. And it's kind of sad how you can do all that good work, because I look at certain other teams in the Premier League that hadn't done anywhere near the same amount of work, but they're established and they've got more sort of a collateral to spend and to get themselves out of these situations. But when you find yourself looking down the face of that trapdoor, it opens very quickly and you slide down.
Yeah, it's that desperation to stay in the league that I was on about earlier. Obviously, going into the season after, we wouldn't have known at the time potentially, but obviously the club was looking at takeover potentials going forward, and all that was going on in the background. So again, the board was a massive part of our success. Maybe that I was taken off the ball a little bit, and the guys that came in were new. So all of a sudden, something that was so consistent, so thorough, so planned and thought out isn't as active in doing all those things anymore. And then they've gone. I know Hugh Jenkins stayed in his role afterwards, but he wasn't ultimately having the control that he would have had previously. And I know we'll get on to that when it happens. But the year after, funnily enough, like after Boney left, was actually our highest. It was kind of like a false dawn, maybe, because it was under Gary Monk. It was our highest position. But I think ultimately it is the start of where it does begin to decline. We didn't know it at the time, celebrating a high level of success, but the playing style started to drift. It wasn't necessarily the free-flowing, passing football, attacking. Over time, I think under Gary Monk, that became more rigid and defensive. But again, when you've been successful, nobody really questioned it that year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah. Go on. You can.
I think the other thing as well for me is that not just in terms of Swansea getting decisions right, there is a sort of, I don't know, you've run out of time to start, because when teams have to change, and then this is the one thing I would say in terms of not just Swansea sort of on the tail end of their Premier League iteration, but Swansea now, teams get so frightened about moving, not standing still. If you stand still, you're dead in terms of football. And there are certain teams that look around and they go, oh, well, and this does work. There are certain teams that stay up by default in the Premier League just because other teams are inexplicably worse. But I believe that you have to make a choice, make a move, do something, and try and move in a direction and hope it is the right direction. And Swansea had the history of making the right choices. And
you can't get it right forever.
Yeah, you can't. You just can't.
Yeah. And I think that's realistic, to be fair. I mean, we had a long time where we were doing well and we were on the up, and it was going to end at some point. And even though this was the peak, like 100% this was the peak for different reasons as well. It wasn't necessarily like, I think Michael Laudrup era was more enjoyable, but this was technically the highest finish, wasn't it? So but I mean, we signed like this season. I know maybe controversies since, but and I listened to a podcast actually where he was speaking to it. I was halfway through listening to it this morning. But Gylfi Sigurdsson come back for his second time at the club, and he again is a very important player for us in our Premier League time. Very successful, and from this moment until he went for the second time, he was kind of key and instrumental and the key player in the system. Another one that I've seen came this year as well, which is quite notable, I think. Jefferson Montero. So I think, and I say notable just because of the amount of left backs that he put on the floor. And I think that for, again, us good memories of Ivanovic, I think Callan Chambers had nightmares over him after a period.
I seem to recall Swansea doing Arsenal on a regular basis. At that
Arsenal were like our favourite team to play in terms of big clubs. We love to win against Arsenal. Even when things were looking bad, I think there was one where Alan Curtis was caretaker manager when Guizelin was like in hospital being ill. I remember, I think this might have been the season after the one we're talking about now, if we're moving on to that. But he, so Alan Curtis is picking the team, and we see like, oh, there's a new left back, Stephen Kingsley. We knew he was in the youth system, but he's never played the game before. We're like, oh my God, what's this team selection? A couple of other weird things there. We're like, oh, we're going to get battered. Are we going to win 1-0? I think it was 1-0. But yeah, crazy.
But this is the thing as well, is that like Swansea and other teams as well have, if you go up and, like I say, the experience had changed, you weren't just in there to enjoy it. You were in there to stay up and to not just try and, we'll play the bottom 10 and we'll get those results or whatever. But the games that you play against an Arsenal or a Liverpool in the League Cup or whoever, those are the victories, and those are the memories that, like, you go, okay, yeah, that's what we're. And for the most part, like, I can think of Stoke, obviously, because they had a big reputation against Arsenal, and Swansea, and they were two very different sides of the same coin in terms of they both came up and they both gave bigger teams issues, but playing different
Arsenal,
ways.
Though, like you're saying about the style, we're more similar, I think, than a lot of other clubs, which I thought was quite funny because they like to try and play nice football in a certain way under Wenger, didn't they? And we would go there and play nicer football and win, and it was just amazing.
I think that's what's funny. I think that's like sort of an underrated caveat of the teams that aren't necessarily the big six or the more prevalent teams that you would expect to be talking about in the Premier League, because both yourselves and Stoke had similar success against Arsenal. Although I do, having done the research for this book, Arsenal beat them 10 times out of 10 at the Emirates. So slightly less success than I remember. But, like, Arsenal was your typical, and this goes more to sort of lean into what was going on with them at the time. But the Premier League has been full of teams that aren't necessarily going to be challenging for the title, but they still have their fun. And we talked about it earlier, the teams and the fans, and like, I hate to, I don't know if it's in the Wilfred Boney chapter or if it's in a different chapter, but in terms of you go into the game week in and week out, at the end of the season, no one just meets up and goes, we finished 6th, you finished 7th, that means we're better than you. It's about week to week. It's about, like, okay, yeah, you might finish higher at the end of the day, but only one team can win it. So at the end, like, it's about the journey, and it's about those players and about those moments. And if they come more often than not, then you're doing better than most teams.
Yeah. And you're right. And there's like, I'm looking at the list of the players that we had in that era, and there's always then one or two that stand out each year about how they've come in and made an influence. So again, you got Andre Ayew then the year after, another big player for us who came in and made some big moments. Got his move again because he'd done well to West Ham afterwards, and ultimately quite a similar story perhaps to Wilfred Boney. Grass wasn't always greener, and he came back. You only actually left last year for the most recent time, but yeah, it's crazy how, back to what you said earlier, some players just fit in a system as well. They get on so well and bond with the club or with the fans and become an important part, and then you have the memories that are linked then to those players of that time. So like I mentioned, Michu, Boney, I would say Andre Ayew and Sigurdsson, 4 big ones for us in terms of players we've signed, done well, made an impact, and then perhaps moved on. If you're going to talk about Leon Britton's and that sort of thing, that's a different conversation in terms of the respect and what it means to the club. But in terms of like big players coming in the Premier League, those guys are definitely up there, some of the good moments.
Well, the other thing as well is that you've got players for clubs, just to piggyback off that.
Yeah.
So Bonnie comes back. Bonnie spiritually, I mean, if you believe some of the interviews that he's given in the interim, he didn't really leave. He was speaking to people at the club. He very much had a vibe for the club. He got a feel for the club while he was there. And, like, I'll hark back to what I said earlier. People think about certain players as, they're just in it for the pay grade. And to be fair, there probably is an element of that. They're very handsomely quantified in terms of their financial compensation. But he You go on Twitter right now and search Wilfred Boney, and you will see that Swansea song. You will see this like people quoting the video, and that's what you want. That's what football's about. Like it's that connection. It's that sort of if you go through football throughout your entire life, maybe you'll I'm fortunate enough to have seen more than most win certain things, but with certain players and certain times of history where you have the ability to be taken along on a ride like that, and you feel that connection with the player, and not everyone can, like in the Premier League, one team will win it next year, but there'll be so many other things that can happen in the Championship. Like if it's all about who wins and who doesn't, then what have we got really? There's 5 teams that are happy. Like I feel very strongly about a player coming into a club and making an impact, not just in terms of the goals he scores, but in terms of in terms of those in the stands. And I think this is where the book comes into its own, in terms of I don't really want it to be about, oh, Bonnie came in, he scored loads of goals, he was good. I want it to be about a connection point between the fan base and that player.
Yeah.
And that for me and for that time, I think there maybe are a couple of players that Swansea have that are thought of higher, but it was the perfect time for the club. And at that point, you don't often get to as a club in their history, because English football, British football, obviously, I don't want to go too far, because the Premier League history and even Division 1 history, it goes back over 100 years. Like Swansea City, the history of that goes back more than just the last 10 years or so. And we've got so much, every club, in terms of the rivals, the players, the history, to this. And to be witness to what was an unbelievable period of time, that's fantastic. That's everything you could want.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it works on the other end of the spectrum a little bit as well. Like you mentioned earlier, Bob Bradley. As much as perhaps wasn't comfortable at the time, he's a bit of a meme, isn't he, now, in terms of how he's thought about how people perceive him. I felt a bit sorry for him, actually, because if you're in his shoes, we just got new American owners, which is why they brought him in. For a start, they sacked Guidelin unfairly, right? We had a bad start to the season, but we'd played like 6 of the top 7 clubs in the first 7 games. And we've been losing like 2-1 to Man City, 2-1 to Liverpool, and they score in like the 90th minute or something, which that's not really that bad for where we are. But because it was a loss, bye-bye, out you go, on his birthday as well. But obviously we knew afterwards, when Bob Bradley came in and it was like announced immediately he was American, there was just, they wanted to get an American guy in. That's essentially what it was. But if you're Bob Bradley, you just can't say no to that opportunity, can you? Like, no, you just can't. So you do your best, but it's not.
I don't think it's on him. I just think, and this is a complete outside perspective, but this might give you like some sort of like Vietnam style flashbacks. But the game against Crystal Palace.
That's like, but again, a high out of the low, because, and I say a high, but it was kind of like a roller coaster.
Yeah, it just this thing, when things like that happen, when a game like that transpires, you know that there's more to it than just that. And maybe that I'm not an analyst, I'm not a tactician, and I don't want to be even associated with, like, I know nothing about football. Bob Bradley knows infinitely more about football than me. But when something like that happens, your eyebrows just raise a little and go, oh, hello, something's going on there at this club at this time. And it's really hard to swallow the pill of, maybe this is just going badly, especially when it's gone so well before.
He didn't last that long, did he? But his kind of theme was, we actually played quite well under him for the first 10-15 minutes in a match. We looked really good, positive, creating chances, just perhaps couldn't score first. And then all of a sudden, the other team would score from a counter-attack. And then 5 minutes later, we're like 3-0 down. And that happened in like a couple of games in a row. Like, we just fall apart as soon as we conceded. Every game he would start well, like, oh, maybe it's the one that's gonna start get us going, but couldn't score. They score, that's it, game over, 3-0. But the Crystal Palace game specifically, I was at a wedding where they were like, oh yeah, no phones, no football, but obviously we were under the table trying to keep track of the score. And it was like, oh yeah, look, we're 3-1 up. Oh, yeah, this is good. He's actually, home against Palace. I think they might have been struggling at the time, and we were, oh, that must be right. Lucky your phone like 15 minutes later or something. 4-3. Oh my God, what? It's like 80-something minutes, it's 4-3. What's going on here? We were literally 3-1 up. I can't believe it. Oh my God, that's it. A bad mood now for the rest of the night. And then someone over there is like, oh, they've equalised. It's like 2 minutes left or something. And it's like, what? And then you open your phone up and it's like, oh, we won. Honestly, like the like it was crazy, a crazy day. Llorente was making a statement because Bob Bradley decided he didn't want to play him, and Borja Baston was playing, not really doing much. Like, I don't know, it was carnage, to be honest. But but yeah, Llorente, like a World Cup winner.
Yeah, exactly. I'd even go so far. I don't think he's ever done much, but I think someone like Borja Baston, who actually had decent stats going into that, off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Highly rated by Atletico Madrid.
Yeah.
He'd only been really out on loan in the league, but the Atletico Madrid fans, when he left to come to us, and £16 million, a lot of money, like for a guy who was kind of a prospect at the time. You know, they were quite sad. They were like, oh, you know, we liked him. We thought he was going to have a decent future. Hope he does well, but it just didn't work for him.
Well, it's not a direct parallel, but you can draw a straight line between Boney and Baston in terms of like, we've done this before and it's worked.
Yeah.
And football transfers don't always work out like that. Man City had that when they bought Boney. You have that when you buy Baston. And it's just, I do think there's a certain element of closing a loop when Boney comes back to Swansea. And it would have been beautiful if he'd have been able to do something to stop that.
It was heartbreaking a little bit because like it was so much of a love story, if you like. But it just didn't work out the second time. And it was hard to like, obviously some people are like, oh, you got to let it go, he's done, he's not the same. But then other people are like, oh, but you know, play him in the next game, he'll come back to me and just needs fitness, because I know he had bad injury record when he went to Stoke and some of his Man City time. But going back to, you said about the Baston signing not working, the problem was, and I mentioned earlier under Monk where the style changed or started changing, and then you'd add, who was after Monk? You had Alan Curtis for a bit, then Guizelin, then Bradley, then Paul Clement. And it was going more defensive like every time, essentially. Guizelin's wasn't, it was more Italian, if you get what I mean. But we were still signing players for Michael Laudrup, even though he's not there. And there's a couple of examples after, in the last year, before we go down. So you've got big one, Renato Sanchez, and Rogan Mesa. They're probably the two main ones, where Rogan Mesa, he's a good player. He didn't do anything for the Swans, but we signed him at the wrong time, under the wrong manager and the wrong system. He would have been perfect playing alongside Leon Britton under Brendan Rodgers or Michael Laudrup, but not playing against alongside like Sam Clucas and Jack Coconut, like when we're playing 5 at the back system under Paul Clement and just trying to keep teams out. And
have I plucked this out of thin air or got this completely wrong? But didn't you have Adair at the top? Not
Adair
as well.
Yeah, Adair was.
And this is completely like glossing over Gomez as well. So there was I think this is the
Adair was the year that Gary Monk got sacked. And Bafemi Gomez was there as well. Yeah,
it's just an interesting one in terms of players had fit the right. You say that's being signed for maybe different managers, but there was never really any sort of signings that maybe not misfired. I think that's the wrong way of putting it, but just didn't quite work out. Like you mentioned Renato Sanchez. Even now, that sounds baffling because of what he's gone on to do, and still the prospects.
He's a quality player, and do you know what? Yeah. He couldn't. He came because of Paul Clement's links to him, really.
Yes,
but like, I think he'd been a naughty boy at Bayern Munich and they wanted to send him out and he didn't want to get sent out and he didn't give 2 hoots about really trying that much at the start anyway. And Paul Clement couldn't coax that out of him. And I'm sure you've seen that infamous thing of him passing to the advertising board and Paul Clement's little reaction afterwards. But when Carlos Carvajal came in, he's Portuguese as well, he did actually get something out of him for a couple of games until he got injured. And it looked like, he was like, oh my God. Because I think it was like January or February. And he was like, maybe he can get enough out of him now to make a difference for the second half of the season, turn things around for us and keep us in the league. And he started looking like the player that we thought he might be in glimpses. And then he got injured for the rest of the season, unfortunately. But, you know, again, the manager, like I think Carvajal was dealt a bad hand in terms of like people probably look back on him as the manager that sent us down, but the damage was already done. He actually had a good points return in his period at the club. I think if he had that over the full season, we wouldn't have gone down.
I think the thing, and stability is the thing that most clubs try desperately to cling towards, and it was something that you had for quite some time. And
yeah,
it's that it's a really hard thing to balance on the scales of, I don't know what you call it. It's not footballing justice because that's not the right word. It's just footballing survival of we need to do something versus we've got to try and keep things the way they are because we need stability.
Yeah.
And a lot of clubs, as they're sort of looking over the precipice, just make moves and do things that on paper they wouldn't normally do. I'll go back to this. If Swansea maybe not don't win the League Cup. In fact, I have to take the League Cup off the table because it's such a big thing. But if Swansea had just done okay, finished 17th that first season, Rodgers goes. I'm not saying they don't buy Bonner because obviously the scouting and everything that was in place there, but the moves you make and the decisions you decide and the path you take as a football club is dictated by what's going on around you at the time. And Swansea at the time, it's fairly blasé of me to say, oh, they could just buy Bonnie because they could. But him coming in, and as we already said, like the platform he had, he could hit the ground running. There was no real pressure on him. Whereas if he comes in for that price tag and you've just finished 17th, very different scenario. And it's the same as when you fast forward to the tail end of Swansea's time in the Premier League. Every decision that's made is compounded by the fact of what happens if this doesn't come off.
Well, the last season, you got 15 million for Sam Clucas, another 12 million on Wilfred Boney, and 20.5 million for Andre Ayew in January in the last ditch attempt. I think it was a deadline day. We need something to keep us up kind of transfer. And that I think it's a theme you see quite a lot with clubs desperate to stay up, isn't it? Massive fee on a player and they just don't work. And then you got to deal with that when you go down. And that's what we had to deal with in the end. I mean, Ayew did okay for us when he came back, but it was a big task to keep us up, I think. And that's why we couldn't sign a lot of our targets. We were linked with a lot of people. I think Nicholas Gaitan was one of them. I can't remember now. It's going back a couple of years. But there was a couple of people that, good players. Like there was a striker from Atletico Madrid. I can't remember his name. But he turned us down basically because we were bottom of the table, so far adrift. It was like, if I go there, like, and they go down, what's my get out basically, and turn us down. But yeah, it's that desperation again I spoke about earlier in terms of trying to stay here. You take that risk to stay because the money is there to repay it if you stay up. It's just if the risk doesn't pay off, that's when the problems start, I guess.
And ultimately, that's football in terms of so many teams. They try and roll the dice on what can be versus what is.
Yeah.
And I think the fortunate thing for Swansea is that they weren't looking at it from a perspective of, oh, we're going to try and do this because, maybe one day. I do think certain teams get caught in this idea of we'll finish 17th for the sake of finishing 17th.
Yeah.
Swansea were never that. It was always a case of we're going to try. From the moment they arrived in the Premier League to the moment they left, they tried to be a football team and tried to do it. And I'm hesitant to use this term the right way, but in a way that's progressive and doing things that the fans will like.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we did lose our way slightly going towards the end, but I think, as I've said, it comes with that. Took our eye off the ball. It was the takeover, all that stuff. The takeover wasn't good. It was quite controversial, and the new guys were learning a lot of bad decisions and then trying to catch up on your bad decisions. The managers were brought in to keep us up when there was a sacking, and then when you get into that mentality, it's like, right, we'll push the style of play to the summer. Get your style in the summer. Just keep us up for now. But sometimes the summer, it doesn't come, does it? Essentially, so that's what happened towards the end. It wasn't like we were maliciously trying to change our style of play. It was a case of like, we just need to stay up now. So whatever you need to do. So that's why the likes of Paul Clement came in, did so well, and then had more time in the job and didn't do so well, and repeat and repeat, and that's what kept happening. And I maintain to the day, the season that we did go down, I don't know what other sort of like non-Swansea fans think of our relegation. We were quite far adrift when Carvajal took over. We actually managed to lift ourselves off the bottom of the table. I think we actually got out of the relegation zone briefly. We had Andre Ayew, like I said, we signed him. He was playing alongside his brother, Jordan Ayew, who we had at the club for a couple of seasons at that point. And we had Tammy Abraham, didn't we, as well, in that season. So we had some good players there. So we've done well. Those two in particular, the two Ayews, had a good connection, and it was working. We were getting some goals, getting some good attacks under Carvajal. Jordan Ayew gets sent off in a match quite early on against Huddersfield away. We end up drawing that match 0-0. Now, at the time, you're like, oh, that's a good point away from home. I think we were then maybe like just outside the relegation. 0-0 away from home. Good point when you get a man sent off so early. Yeah? They were one of our rivals to go down that year. We knew we had 2 home matches coming up against Stoke and Southampton, a couple of matches before that. But, you argue like, if we can hold our own now and then win those 2 games, we're safe. But because he got sent off, it disrupted any attacking rhythm we had. We didn't score a goal for his entire 3-match ban. And I think actually when he came back, we really struggled. Like, the momentum was gone. I think we lost to both Stoke and Southampton. And yeah, it was game over. But that red card, I maintain to this day, that is what sent us down ultimately in the end.
And it's so tangible and like almost sand through an hourglass, in the sense of, unless you've got the untold riches, unless you've got the never-ending chest of, we can take a Wilfred Boney, we could take a striker, we could do this, we could do that, and if it doesn't work out, we'll just do it again next year.
Yeah.
It almost feels cynical to say that. It almost feels harsh, but I think there are so many clubs that attempt to scramble out of the bottom, and when they have the chance to survive, they almost oversell the club a little. I think potentially the times Swansea are in the league, it's not quite as bad, because you say like the fees that you were being able to purchase, as opposed to sort of in the sort of late 90s, mid 2000s, where if teams went down, they went down again and were in real trouble and really gambled the farm. And
yeah. Well, Sunderland did that recently, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah. There's so many clubs in League One, or that have been in League One, that still are in League One.
Wednesday,
actually. Yep.
Perhaps.
Bradford,
Bolton,
Oldham. They're not in the league anymore. I mean, that's slightly different story. I mean, hugely. Talk about ownerships and about getting things wrong and about things going completely off the rails there. Every club looks at what they're doing as what could have been and what could be, and it's sort of bittersweet to say we had our time and we'll go again, because you kind of want to just be okay.
Yeah.
But that's football, and you
can't stay up there forever. Like, it's every club. How many clubs are in the league? And you think every club wants to go up and do well, and you're going to have your time, and then you're going to have your time where you're not doing so well. And I think that's part of the game, and that's why everyone loves it. As much as it's hard to come home from a loss and you go home and say, we're playing rubbish, we should do this, that, or the other, sack the manager, whatever, when it's going wrong, ultimately, you're just not always, most clubs are just not always going to have success. No. There's the few at the top of the food chain, but everyone else is kind of like, you're going to rotate. It is.
And those days where you're coming home from, I'm going to pick a team at random here, having lost away at Southend, for example, or just you've gone the other side of, either Newcastle or down by Southampton way, and you've done 4 hours of travel there and back, and it just doesn't feel worth it. When it does happen, when you do get a League Cup or a Europa League or a season or two, or in Swansea's case, a couple like that, you just sort of have to hold those dear.
Yeah. And if we want to perhaps end the conversation with, maybe we want to look at all of the time in the Championship, but the 1 year where we did come down, I said we kind of lost our way a little bit. We broke, but it was kind of like a fresh start as well. We're going down now. We're not in Premier anymore. We don't got that money. Fresh start. Brought in a young manager, Graham Potter, with something to prove. The team, obviously, a load of the Premier League players went. A lot of the like big money, more experienced players. We used a lot of our academy to bump up the first team. A lot of those have since now moved on. You've got the likes of Dan James, you've got Ollie McBurney, who went for big fees. Connor Roberts, who's recently, Joe Rodon. So they bumped up the first team. And if there's a good game to pick as one to focus on from that year, especially having compared the Man City era with Boney and all the rest of it, we drew them in the League Cup and so close to knocking them out as a championship club, playing the way that, done us so well as we went up in the Premier League, passing football against the club that does it the best, the manager that does it the best, Pep Guardiola, and we played them at their own game, tiki-taka, and I don't know if you've seen it, but Burson Salina's goal, I think it's Burson Salina's goal, either him or Dyer's goal, where we play it out from our goalkeeper, we're playing in triangles in the corner flag of our pitch with Man City pressing us, playing around them, straight up the other end on a just passing through them. Such a good team goal of that style of play and that system, of all the history of what's done us so well. And I guess that's a good like fresh start. What they're trying to do again, and they would come down, they start again. And it was good to see the youngsters doing that sort of thing against Man City. Ultimately, they won. No VAR, but let's not talk about that. But yeah, they won. But still, such an amazing game. Even if we lost 3-2, really good performance.
I think as well, I talked about generational stuff and football is cyclical and what goes will come again. Not for like overnight. And if you're able to build and able to do things, I firmly believe in the way that Swansea built up to the Premier League and how they were acted initially. That's as good as it gets for someone that doesn't have the resources, someone that doesn't have the money to do it. It's the blueprint, I think. There might even be, I might even use that exact word in the book. I think
that's a term a lot of people do use and say, people, I've seen it lots of times, people saying Swansea, the first ones to do it. There's a documentary on it. I think Bournemouth perhaps followed that sort of style. You got Brentford recently doing something similar, where they've had success doing the same sort of thing. So it's one of those where you're the first to do it, but maybe not the best doing it right now. But that's what we've got to try and find again.
And again, like just the beauty of the game is that if you lose, you don't like losing. No one likes losing. No one likes going down. No one likes not winning. But you get to go again. And it's really funny. We started the podcast talking about how the World Cup, whilst qualifying for the World Cup, and you'd think the season having just finished, it would be, I've had my fill of football, I need a break. But we've had a week, maybe 2 weeks. And I'm just like, no, I want games now. I want the season to start already.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have to apologise. I'm probably making you miss the football now, and on this podcast, the England game. But
I mean, I don't know. Eagle-eyed listeners may have clocked throughout this podcast who I actually support, which might give away why I don't particularly care too much about what England may or may not be doing at this particular time. But such is life, such is football. This is a much better way of spending our time, reminiscing of a Swansea during the Premier League years, infinitely.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Do you know, I just looked what the score was, that's all. But I think it's Nations League, isn't it, they're playing in?
Yes.
Am I right in saying if they lose this game, they get relegated?
Given they've only played 2, I would be surprised. I don't think you can mathematically be relegated from a group of 4 after 2. But
it's a group of 4. I think some of the groups of 3. But
no, it's Germany, Italy, and Hungary. But with Hungary already having won, then
it'll come down to goal difference, perhaps. Then
potentially, yeah. I think there's
interesting. Yeah. Just funny for a little bit of banter and all the rest of it. But
like we've got an interesting sort of couple of months in terms of international football to come. England have got, I mean, obviously international break when the season starts. I'm talking about the season starting again, and then you get another international break.
Yeah.
In September, they've got to play Italy and Germany back to back. England, this is, and that's going to be a really interesting week. And then obviously the World Cup with Wales and England going through, undoubtedly at the hands of USA and Iran being left very much to the side. I checked this the other day, by the way. Stunned. Wales topped the group in 2016, having lost to England in the first game.
Yeah.
I had an image in my head that they topped the group, but I thought they'd done it on 7 points, and I was like, that's not possible. But I wouldn't be entirely surprised to see something similar happen again.
Did you draw against like Russia or something, and did you lose?
Yes,
one of them?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a great tournament all round for England. That is. Roy Hodgson, the less said the better. Wales, though, I was in very much a similar vein as Swansea in their sort of Europa League adventures. Wales in Euro 2016 was, you can't help but look at it with awe and be like, yeah, why not? Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, again, for Wales qualifying, like, that's really good for Swansea and just the impact we've had on that. If you look at the actual players in the team, you've got Joe Allen, Ben Davies was there, Connor Roberts was there, Dan James. That's 4. I might be missing one. I don't think I am. You obviously used to have Ashley Williams. Ben Kapangu was probably on the bench, was he? We've provided a lot of players to the Welsh setup in recent years, and that's something for us to be proud of as well. I think, even if they're not playing here anymore. Joe Rudon, did I say him? I don't think I did. But yeah, like it's nice to see our academy as one of the legacies, perhaps, from the Premier League, even though it's been downgraded now because of championship money and all the rest of it. The couple of years after relegation, when we were pumping players out, or during the Premier League, where we had some like Ben Davies, it's good to see that investment, the money that came with the Premier League, gave some local players and some Welsh players good chances to get their football careers going, and it has shown on the international stage, with Wales being in 3 competitions recently. So we went through a long period where Wales just didn't qualify for competitions, and now 2 Euros and a World Cup. So definitely happy with that.
I know, undoubtedly one of the sort of on the up and coming teams that I've seen. I remember very vividly watching the game in the Euros against, I think it was Turkey, and just being in awe of the incredible defensive performance. What would have been absolute chaos, because obviously the missed penalty, and football being football, you're thinking, oh, they're going to pay for that, and then it was just. I think obviously with COVID and the way football has been sort of protracted over the last couple of years, we're starting to see on the other side of that now, like what the game meant. And obviously, without meaning to just go in too deep, but this is in the book as well about COVID and its effect on fans being at the stadiums. And I think that's partly one of the reasons why I wanted to write it, is a sense of, I just missed football, and we wanted to get back to what we perceive to be normal.
Yeah, different conversation, but as much as I missed football, missed being there, missed the atmosphere, what I don't miss about now that being normal again is having it all available in my house all the time, and now it's not again. And I think, and this is a different conversation for a different day, and I don't know what your thoughts on it are, but we need a different system when it comes to the televisation of football. I think our system is so outdated. You've got all these streaming services like Netflix or DAZN or whatever. Even the individual clubs have all got their own ways of providing that. Why is there no like pay-per-view per game if you want it? Like, or a Sky Sports package, follow your club, something like that. Like, it's so outdated, and the 3 o'clock curfew on lack of televised games, because I will always prefer to go to a match, but sometimes I'm in work and I like to try and watch it on my break, and I can't now because it's just never around. You can't, especially in the Championship, it's just not available. But that's just like a side thought based on what you just said, because other countries like America, you're in Australia, you're in Europe, whatever, you can watch all the Premier League matches, but in the country where they're played, you can't.
Even in different sports, in a lot of American sports, they have packages related to like the NBA. You can follow a team and you get the pass for that team.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. The one thing I would say, I said to you before that I am a footballing romantic. Make no mistake, in this book there are some scathing comments and fingers pointed, shall we say, about the money that is and does exist within the game, and it's sort of chokehold potentially. I think I believe in the pureness of the actual game itself, but in the way it's run, maybe less so.
I think it's always the same with anything that brings money in, and you'd probably argue football is the biggest sport in the world financially. So, I mean, you just need to look at that Super League prospect, and you to understand where the people who hold the power in the game, where their minds are really. So, unfortunately, like, and as much as that's maybe a minority of clubs in terms of the amount of revenue they perhaps are responsible for, it's probably well over in the 90%. Just the clubs involved in that Super League, in terms of like, if they weren't there, Sky want that, or like whoever's broadcasting want that, so that's where the money is, or they control all the money, and that's how it ends up getting distributed. But yeah, there's definitely, I don't know what the fix is, but it's not great, is it?
The one thing I would say is that there isn't an obvious fix, but the system, the pyramid, the idea of being able to go from conference to the Premier League, the setup that we currently exist in is so much different to that they have in Italy and Spain and other countries. And we have so much history, so much vast history between all the different clubs up and down the 92 Football League clubs, let alone beyond that, that I think
that needs to be protected, I think.
Correct. Like, 100%. Yeah.
Because like, even if you look at America, especially, if you can have direct comparison with what the Super League could have been, the lack of relegation for me, you just lose so much. The relegation promotion, like, maybe when you've never had it, like the MLS, I think they buy their way in and they come back to the money. Like, that all comes down to money again. That's a money sport. But here, you can still be like, who's the one I went out to business? Was it Barrow or Bury?
Bury.
They theoretically, in the next 20 years, they could be back. They could come up to the Championship, the Premier League again, theoretically, after going bust. And what a fairy tale that would be. And maybe it seems unlikely, but it's possible. And that's what makes the system so great, I think. And that's why the English system is perhaps considered the best one.
Well, I think as well, we talked about Swansea having their European adventure. You want to play teams that are at a different level or a different setting. If you play Burton and if you play Burton Albion, I was going to say Burton and Albion. I was going to say, well, why am I splitting them into two teams? If you play Burton Albion every year, going there isn't a big deal. And if you play Barcelona every year, going there isn't a big deal. The reason why you enjoy these trips, these places, going to Napoli, going to Atletico,
Malmo.
Going to
why would I ever go to Malmo? Like, I mean, unless I was perhaps traveling, but it's something that you just don't think of, isn't it? Like, I want to play Malmo. Like, I'll go to Malmo, but that's a random thing that you're like, you'd experience that as a one-off, and that makes it special. Yeah, but we've been going longer than I perhaps first anticipated. I hope it's all right for you. Obviously,
no, sorry to have chatted your ear off.
No, that's fine. I've been enjoying it. It's been good. Got a day off tomorrow, so I'm all good for time. But maybe we should close the curtains there. Hour and a half. I think it's a good chunky one, which is good for the summer actually, because obviously not much football on at the moment. But if I can just ask you once again to remind everyone about your book, what it's called, where to find it, all the rest of it.
Sure. It's the Cornerstone collection, 45 different chapters that cover every team in Premier League history, whether it be a full chapter like Wilfred Brodie and Swansea. There are so many different players of all varying different sort of statures. There are some really iconic Premier League players in there, but also some stories that you might not have heard before, some teams that you might not even be aware of their stories. And you can get it on Waterstones, WH Smith, Amazon. You can go on Twitter at SQ Studios is my Twitter handle. I've got the link in my bio there. It's coming out in July. I would implore anyone, if you're a football fan, whether you're a Swansea fan or not, there's more to it than just that one. Go in, check it out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll try my best. I'll make a note now to make sure I put the links and stuff in the video description. And when I do tweet out the podcast or whatever, I'll obviously try and direct people as well. But really appreciate you coming on, and really enjoyed the chat. You're always welcome to come back in the future. As I said to you in the email, I should have said at the start of the podcast, really, but I wanted to get straight into it. Lee obviously is normally with me in terms of doing the podcasts, but he's tied up at the moment at work because he's got some exams for the courses he's doing in regards to his job. I think he's got one on Thursday, so all the best of luck to him. But that's why he's not here. You would have loved this conversation, and I'll be honest, he probably would have been a little bit more insightful than me in terms of the history, like before Premier League. He's followed them for longer than I have, so he's got a little bit more knowledge. But he'd be, I'm sure he'd be enjoying listening back when he gets hold of it. But in the future, if you want to come back on any other books, or maybe after the book's launched, if you want to talk about anything specific or ask us anything, always welcome to come back on.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. But yeah, so that's been Stuart. Hopefully everyone go check out his book. Just want to ask everyone, if you did get this far into the podcast, thank you very much for staying for a start. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Really supports us as a channel. Trying to push on now into the new season. Let's try and hit 500. And yeah, leave a like as well if you enjoyed what we've been talking about. And if you're going to buy the book, click the like button so we know perhaps how many extra pairs of eyes are going to read this fantastic piece of work that Stuart's been focused on. And if you do want to perhaps maybe ask him a question, head over to Twitter or put it in the comments, and maybe I can pass them over if there's anything specific that you want to ask about the book, and we can try and get an answer for you. But on that note, thank you again for coming on, Stuart, and shall catch you all in the next episode. Thank you very much.